The jar was still warm from the sun when I tipped the last of the coins into my hand. They smelled like the bottom of a fountain, like wishes and metal and fingers. Lily and Owen were upstairs arguing over a worn-out set of markers, their voices overlapping like birdsong. And I let the silver and copper spill across my palm and disappear into the bank envelope with a little sigh. The house was quiet around the edges of their noise, the way a late afternoon always is in our neighborhood, when everyone else's grills are cooling and the cicadas start up their endless chorus. I slid the envelope into the lockbox behind the cereal boxes, the place Eric had called my secret stash, with a grin that never quite reached his eyes. He knew about it. He'd even held it once and jiggled it in front of the kids like a magician with a trick hat. But I kept it there anyway. Superstition is a second language when you're a mom. You hide things in the same places you hide prayers. The jar had been Lily's idea, even though the fund wasn't in the jar. Not really. We had a proper account with a waiting room and a fern and a woman named Marcy who smiled at me with her whole face the day I'd set it up. But the jar made it visible. The jar made it real. Fireflies, Lily had said, her small chin tilted up with an authority only a child can conjure. Money is like light. You catch it, and you keep it in the jar until you need to let it go. So I called it the Firefly Jar, and sometimes when I moved money around for school clothes or a dentist visit, I wrote that word in the memo line, fireflies, so I'd remember what it was for when it hurt to watch it go. That day, with the last of the coins tucked away, I stood in the kitchen a moment longer than I needed to. The light leaned in through the window, magnolia leaves nodding outside as if they agreed with me. I could smell the bleach from the rag I'd been using, that sharp hospital-clean scent I'd never stopped associating with my own mother's hands. When Owen bellowed from upstairs, I called back the way I always did. Equal parts peacekeeper and parade marshal, and when Eric's key turned in the lock, I tucked the lockbox deeper into its hideaway, only for the comfort of it. "Hey," he said, and kissed me on the temple the way a brother might. He smelled like the parking lot and spearmint gum. "Got something for you." He waggled a paper bag. There was a bakery logo on it, the one from the place near his office with the expensive pastries I always said tasted like regret. "You didn't have to," I said, and smiled because refusing small luxuries had become a reflex. A trick you learn when the person across the table is keeping score and you don't want to know the total. "Treat yourself," he said, already moving past me, already heading for the fridge as if his movement through the house was a fact of nature I should accept. He pulled a beer from the shelf we always kept stocked for him and popped the cap with the side of the counter. The cap skittered across the floor. He didn't pick it up. That night I lay in bed with the kind of tired that's a weight more than a feeling. I counted little victories to lull myself to sleep. New sneakers out of season for the discount. A second-hand winter coat that looked unworn. That envelope sealed and snug in its box. In the morning, the cereal boxes were in a different order. It was nothing. We've all rearranged a shelf in a thoughtless way, but when I reached back, my fingers found air where steel should have been. The lockbox was gone, and the shelf was empty except for a few crumbs of granola. I didn't scream. My body went stone still and cold, like a hand in snow. My mouth opened and closed around nothing. I slid the cereal forward and stared into the shadow behind them, and I waited for the part where it wouldn't be real. The lockbox wasn't a treasure chest. It was a cheap little thing that stuck when you turned the key. It was ridiculous to feel as if someone had lifted the floor out from under me, but the air felt thin. The kitchen looked too bright. "Eric," I called and heard my voice scratch like a match struck on damp wood. He came in with his phone in his hand and rolled his eyes like I'd asked him to move a mountain. "What now?" "The lockbox," I said, and breathed out hard through my nose to pull the panic into a tighter shape. "Did you move it?" He glanced at the cereal boxes, shrugged. "That ugly thing." "Yeah, it's fine. I threw it in the garage." "Why?" I stood very still. "It had the deposit in it." "What deposit?" he said, but he didn't look at me, which is its own kind of confession. I swallowed. My throat clicked. For the Firefly, I caught myself on the term we used with the kids and made my voice more adult. "Kids' savings." His mouth twisted, generous and confused all at once, as if I'd asked him why the ocean was wet. "Oh, that. Don't be dramatic, Rach. It's a jar of change." He could do that, spin a word so fast it was suddenly about something else. "And because you're standing there holding the empty space where your certainty used to be, you sit down in his version and try to make yourself smaller inside it." "It's more than change," I said quietly. He kissed my hair again, like the patient husband. You worry too much. I moved it out to make space. We'll talk about it later. We didn't. The day got busy the way days do. Lily needed a costume pin for a class play that involved a bird no one had ever seen. Owen's science project had inexplicably become my science project. Eric sat in the living room and watched a game with the volume down low like he was doing the house a favor. But a little buzzing had started in the back of my head. Something with wings, something caught in a lampshade. I found the lockbox the next afternoon in the garage, sitting on top of a crate of tangled Christmas lights as if it had always belonged there. The key was in the lock. It was empty, not just missing the envelope, but scraped clean. There was a little smear on the bottom like a thumbprint dragged through dust. I took a breath that tasted like gasoline and old wood and the hot smell of rubber. I held the lockbox and felt it light enough to float. I could hear the whine of a saw 2 houses over, and I thought about the way a cut starts as a thin singing noise, and then becomes a line, and then becomes an opening, and then becomes an opening, and then becomes 2 separate things. I put the box down very carefully. I wiped my hands on my jeans because they had started to shake. Eric. I walked back into the house feeling like I was opening a door underwater. Where's the deposit? He muttered something at the screen. Can we not do this right now? This is their money, I said, and my voice broke on the word. It was a small crack. It widened. You move the box. Where is the envelope? He turned and looked at me then, and I knew it wasn't a question of evidence or clarity. It was a question of whether he believed that anything in the house belonged to anyone but him. I took care of something. You're welcome. He leaned back like a king after a pronouncement. Took care of what? There is a small, mean pleasure in asking a question you know will make the other person reveal who they are. It's like lifting a blanket and saying, show me the shape you've been hiding. He rolled his head, bored already. Tessa needed help. It was urgent. I handled it. Tessa, the ex. Her name entered the room like a cold breeze. I could see her and not see her, the way you are with the person your husband used to love. I knew her face from photographs that had slipped from old drawers and a rare social media tag Owen had accidentally clicked once. She had the kind of beauty that makes you want to apologize for staring. She'd also once told me over a neutral cup of coffee arranged and chaperoned by Eric that she hoped we could all be adults. Then she'd smiled at me like you smile at a neighbor who parks too close to your driveway. She needed help, I repeated. The words felt like old gum. For her rent, he said, like a man explaining a diagram to a stubborn child. It's complicated. You used the kids' fund, I said, and there it was, clean and ugly among us, without telling me. His eyes went flat. You wouldn't have understood. I understand that you take from our children to pay your ex's bills, I said. And my hands were steady now, even if the rest of me was a weather system, and the lights were flickering. He stood up, laughing in that way that isn't laughter. Don't be dramatic. Stop telling me I'm dramatic, I said. And all the little micro-slices over the last long stretch of time coalesced into a bright egg. The jokes about how I shouldn't handle money because I grew up eating casseroles made of whatever was left. The way he turned the grocery receipts to account ledgers and called them tests. The little comments in front of friends about how I'd splurge on socks as if socks were champagne. The time he asked Lily if mommy was good at math with a wink at me, and Lily's face fell even though she didn't know why. It had been a drip-drip ache that you learn to step around while you make dinner and pack lunches and squeeze out toothpaste without waste. It turned into a flood when I heard him say, it was a loan to myself. It's all the same pot. No, I said, it isn't. He shrugged, hands in his pockets. The international sign for a guy who has already decided you're overreacting. We'll refill it. Calm down. I didn't call him a thief. I didn't throw anything. I picked up the lunch boxes and packed them with the motions I could do half asleep, and I moved through the noise of my thoughts like a swimmer through a rip current. You let it pull you out so you won't drown from fighting the wrong thing. You wait for the moment to angle for shore. That moment started as a ping on my phone not long after. Transfer complete, the subject line read, as if that word is ever neutral. The bank's app was an old friend I'd learned how to navigate in the walls of my chest while I waited on hold for a school nurse to tell me whether an ice pack would do. I opened the email as if I were removing a splinter. The memo line said one word, fireflies. It took me a breath to register it. The earth tilted a fraction. He hadn't known that the word was just for me and Lily and Owen. He'd copied it because it sat right there on the list of options from previous activity, as if the app had placed a hand on his wrist and guided his pen. He'd chosen it because it was easy. He'd sent our children's future and a little private name for it to a person he used to stand beside. and he hadn't even bothered to rename the theft. A second ping. A text from a friend of a friend I'd met at the school fundraiser, the one who always wore a scarf wrapped like a promise. "Random question," she wrote, "but didn't your husband's ex just post a story with a new designer bag? It looked expensive. Didn't she tag him in a weird inside joke way?" A cold kind of clarity came over me. I'm not proud of how awake I felt. It made me remember an earlier version of myself, the one who had sat on the floor of a tiny apartment, tracing a map in the air with a pencil because the city was too big, and being poor feels like having to ask permission from wind. That girl had moved through the world with her bag zipped tight and her chin up. She had said yes to Eric because he had seemed like shelter. I stood in our kitchen and it felt like I'd weathered a storm only to find myself in a different one. When the call came from the school office the next day, it was about a payment bouncing. The woman on the phone was so kind her voice made me cry. I told her it was a mistake and I'd fix it, and she believed me, because that's what you do when another mother sounds like she's trying not to spill. By then, I had begun to gather paper like a crow arranging a nest. I asked the bank for statements. I printed emails at the library, where the smell of toner felt suddenly like a tonic. I took screenshots of text messages and then printed those too, because you can't hand a judge a phone and say, "Please hold this like you hold a baby bird." The locker key at the credit union glinted in my palm when I picked it up, and the woman behind the counter raised her eyebrows when I asked for a freeze on a minor account. I met her eyes and watched her square her shoulders in that way women do for each other. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "My husband treated school money like a personal wallet," I said. I didn't say the other part, the part where I'd soaked chickpeas overnight and pinched pennies and sold a wedding dress on a resale site to fill that fund. The part where I'd taken extra bakery shifts before dawn so it wouldn't be the kids who felt the thinness of our margins. I didn't say that I'd turned coupons into origami cranes with Lily, not to be cute, but because when you fold something you touch it 3 extra times and it becomes realer. Or that I'd learned how to hem pants by watching videos on my phone under the hum of the bathroom fan so I wouldn't have to listen to Eric breathe like he thought it belonged to him to rest. I took my papers in my trembling hands to the legal aid office downtown, where the chairs in the waiting room were uncomfortably honest and the coffee was strong. A woman named Wendy sat across from me with a pen and a look like a map. She listened. She didn't blink much. When she did, it was to reset the world so it made room for me. "You have more than you think," she said. "You have their names on the account and a pattern. You have the memo lines. You have the school call. You have intent." "Intent?" I said it like a prayer I didn't know I knew. She nodded toward the word on the printed email. "Fireflies." "He knew what he was taking when he took it," she said. "He took it anyway." That night, when I told Eric I had filed, he laughed again, but something in it sounded hollow, like a drum with a split. "You can't be serious," he said. "Over this? Grow up." "You took from our kids," I said, and set his grocery list on the table with the pen on top and a neat cross. "And you lied about it. I'm very serious. Where do you think you'll go?" His smile had sharp edges I had seen in small flashes and denied. "To your mother? To your church friends? You can't even keep track of a lockbox." "You're right," I said, because agreeing disarms a certain kind of bully. "I'm not going anywhere. You are. The order comes tomorrow." It did. It arrived with the weight of a stamp and the crispness of paper. He stared at it like it might announce a raffle. The sheriff waited in the doorway with polite shoulders and eyes that had seen every version of disbelief. He gave Eric as much dignity as a person is owed when they've spent their coin. For a while, the house was quieter than any house should be. Lily and Owen learned the word schedule, the way a person learns new steps, awkwardly and careful to keep their balance. I learned new ways not to cry. I kept going because who else would? And then it was the day of the hearing. The courthouse is its own animal, all marble and old air, and echoes of other people's promises. My shoes clicked more than I wanted them to. I was afraid of making a sound that would leave a mark. Tessa was there, in a dress the color of champagne, her hair smoothed, her expression clean. She glanced at me like a person glances at a stranger who has the same coat. Eric looked tired in a way that made me almost sorry for him. He'd been sending texts for days, elongated apologies that folded in on themselves like paper boats sinking in a rain barrel. "Please, it wasn't like that. I'll pay it back. Don't do this. Be better than this." I sat with Wendy and my neat stack of papers in my hands that somehow remembered how to be still. The judge was a woman with a face like Appalachian granite. She said my name and then and the oxygen arranged itself. The court reporter began to write, her fingers a blur without a sound. When it was my turn, I didn't need to say much. The paper said it for me in bare little block letters. Transfers on dates that had names in our family like Pumpkin Patch and First Recital, a line in the memo that glowed like a lighthouse, fireflies, the order from the school, the email from the bank, the snapshot from social media that made me want to crawl out of my body, a bag I couldn't afford to touch, the caption a winky face that said more than we needed it to. Wendy paced it so slowly that the truth filled up the room and then settled. The funds were meant for the children, she said, without drama. The respondent siphoned the kid's money to his ex. The money is not fungible in the ways he insists. Siphoned. The word landed with a soft tap, like a spoon on a table. I breathed out and thought, say it, and so I did. I had saved the line all this time, biting it back when it wanted to spit itself out in our kitchen, sealing it behind my teeth when friends asked how I was, knowing it wasn't right to waste it anywhere but here. My voice didn't shake, though my knees did. He diverted our children's fund to his ex, I said, and the judge looked at me like a person looks at a compass, and then at the path. I came to court because this is the only way to make it stop. I want the judge to see everything. Eric's attorney, a man with perfect cuffs and a voice like a weather. Report tried to shape the narrative into something else. It was a temporary loan. The ex was in crisis. He was keeping the peace for all the kids in his life. Men like him try on the costume of heroic provider because it fits so easily, people forget to ask who paid for it. But the judge lifted one of the papers with 2 fingers and turned it so the light hit the ink. Fireflies, she read. She looked at me. That's what you called it? My daughter did, I said, and the word daughter braided itself around my heart and pulled. We told them that money is like light. We were going to release it when it was time. The judge nodded once and then set the paper down with the kind of care that tells you something is about to be carved into something harder than air. She asked Tessa questions. She answered. She said she didn't know where the money came from, then admitted that she might have guessed. There was a moment when her face changed, as if she'd taken a sip of bitter tea. Eric stared at the table, and then at me, and then at the door. And then the judge spoke in short, kind sentences that felt like stitches. She was gentle in the way a person is gentle when they have to do a thing that will sting to do it right. She ordered a restoration of the children's fund, not some hazy promise but a plan with teeth. She reprimanded Eric softly and still somehow made the reprimand last like perfume on fabric. She gave me custody that made our home into a harbor and set a schedule for him that would keep the waters from sloshing over the sides. She told Tessa that while the court didn't control her bank account, it could control the blatant acceptance of misdirected funds in the context of co-parenting. She didn't say shame. She didn't have to. Eric made a sound then, a small, unhandsome thing. He asked if he could speak. The judge let him. He stood and stared at the wood grain and then at his shoes like they might offer an exit. I'm sorry, he said. The words unexpectedly human, the way a porch light is human when it flicks on at dusk. I made a mistake. I can't stop thinking about the jar. He glanced at me and then away. We used to call it the firefly jar, he added, like he needed to prove he had been present before that day. The judge waited for me to reply. I don't know if it was a legal invitation or a human one. My knees hurt. My hands were dry from too much hand soap and too many nights of scrubbing counters. I stood anyway. Forgiveness and access aren't the same thing, I said. I forgive you because I have to live with myself, but I won't forget. And I won't let anyone take from our kids again. I didn't realize until I turned to sit down that my hands had stopped shaking. Outside the courthouse, the air tasted like rain waiting to happen. The steps down to the street felt smaller than they had on the way up. Wendy squeezed my shoulder the way you touch a person who has just carried something heavy a long way. Tessa slipped past us without looking at either of us. Her shoes made no sound. Eric followed a few breaths later, his face turned toward the sky like it could erase gravity. He stopped a few feet from me. He wasn't tall enough to make me shrink. He asked again, because people like him believe in repetition, as if the phrase will break different if you say it a certain number of times. Please, he said. I know it doesn't matter, but I am sorry. I didn't think. I thought I could fix it. You can fix what you broke for them, I said. You can refill what you took. You can show up when you're scheduled. You can stop telling stories at parties with my choices as the punchline. You can stop making our daughter doubt herself when she answers a math problem too fast for you to follow. Those would be good places to start. He swallowed. Tessa called his name without turning around. He went. Life after that wasn't cinematic. It was early mornings with the smell of coffee and the scratch of pencil on scratch paper as Lily worked through a problem while Owen made his dinosaurs vote on dinner. It was the car humming like a pet while I waited in the pickup line and learned how not to check my phone like it was a slot machine. It was a Saturday afternoon in the library with a stack of books and the librarian's smile and the whisper nod of other mothers doing the same dance. It was late nights at the kitchen table with a calculator, and it was me applying for a position that would let me use both hands and the parts of my brain that had been sleeping. It was cheap curtains washed so often the seams softened. It was the firefly jar back on the shelf inside joke and mantra and promise. There were bad days when the house felt too big in some corners and too small in others. Days when the kids came home tight with something he said in passing and I had to take a breath and decide how to love them toward a truth that didn't make him a monster, but also didn't repaint the facts. There were better days when Lily used the word interest in 2 different ways correctly and laughed at herself. When Owen scolded us for leaving lights on because they are tired, and I thought, yes, they are, buddy, and so am I, but here we are. Sometimes there were fireflies, real ones, blinking on and off above our patchy lawn like a code we might one day learn to read. At some point I realized I didn't check the lockbox every day anymore. I trusted the math of my own effort. The fun grew in small clumps, like moss in the places the light reached. Marcy at the bank taught the kids how to fill out the deposit slip themselves, and Lily told her about the jar while Owen balanced the pin on his upper lip. And I watched the woman's face soften in that way again that says, yes, this matters. I see it. I see you. Months later, because saying seasons makes it sound prettier than it was, and I won't do that to us, I received an envelope thick enough to hurt when it hit the table. Eric had kept the part of the order that mattered most. Not because he'd become a different person, but because there were consequences now, and men like him were never great at withstandings. The money wasn't an apology, it was a result, but I put it where it belonged. I released light into the jar. We were standing on the sidewalk outside the market when I saw Tessa again. She looked less like a portrait and more like a person. She hesitated and then stepped toward me as if she were walking into a tide. I didn't know, she said, preemptive and soft. I'm not the one you need to say that to, I said, and then, because I am not a saint, I let the quiet stretch. But thank you. She nodded and looked past me at the kids arguing about plums. It's weird, she said, almost to herself, how men like him make you feel like you're selfish for wanting an accounting of your own things. I am not friends with her now. That's not how this works. But I didn't hate her in that moment. I understood something about the space we'd both been in. The performance you're trained to give that says, I'm cool, I'm chill, I'm not like those other women who ask where the money goes and why. It's a flattery we're taught to crave. It never pays. When Lily asked me, in the kind of roundabout of a child who has been watching more than she should, why grown-ups sometimes use kids to hurt other grown-ups, I told her the truth as gently as I could. Some people don't remember the difference between a thing they can take and a thing they have to ask for, I said. It's our job to remind them. It's our job to protect the light. She seemed satisfied with that. She ran into the yard and spun until she fell, the way kids do when falling still feels like flying for a second at the end. Owen stood beside me and squeezed my hand and then let go because a dragonfly had asked for his attention. I have stood in rooms since then that used to make me feel small. I've talked to bank officers and landlords and men who wanted to explain. Interest to me as if I hadn't sat up nights amortizing my own grief. I have learned the sound of my own footsteps when I'm walking into a place with purpose. It's calmer than you'd think. It's the sound of someone who has stopped asking permission from wind. There's a part of me that wants a moral at the end of all this, a stitch to pull through the length of it and tie. Here's the closest I've come. When you steal from your children, you're borrowing from a future that doesn't forget. When you take light out of a jar for your convenience, there's a court and a woman with a face like granite and a mother with trembling hands who will hold the paper up until the room can see what you did. There is a day when the person you wronged will stand up and speak in a voice that doesn't shake, even if her knees are knocking. And there is a kind of forgiveness that is not a door, but a fence. You can stand on that fence and watch me and the kids and the light you didn't get to keep. You can ask yourself what better looks like. You can do the work or you can watch us go. The night the first firefly showed up in our yard after the hearing, Lily cupped her hands as if prayer had a shape. "Can I?" she asked. I nodded. She held the light gently for a moment and then opened her fingers and watched it leave. There was no ceremony, just breath and soft dark and the little pulse of living. We stood in it together, all of us, the way you stand in a song you know the words to without knowing how you learn them. Then we went inside. I turned off the lights, one by one, the way you do when you've been taught to care what things cost and learned how to keep them safely paid.
Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.